The fog off the Hudson River didn't just drift, it crawled. It snaked up the rocky banks, slid across the dead autumn lawn, and pooled heavily against the fieldstone foundation of Blackwood Manor. Julian Vance killed the car's engine. The sudden silence in the station wagon was heavy, broken only by the rhythmic tick-tick-tick of the cooling radiator. Beside him, Claire was staring up at the house. Her hands were clamped tight around a lukewarm paper coffee cup, her knuckles white. "It's bigger than the photos," she whispered. Her voice carried a strange mixture of awe and immediate apprehension. "It's 5 bedrooms, Claire, a wraparound porch, an acre of land," Julian said, turning to look at her, a desperate sort of optimism burning in his eyes. "In Brooklyn, this wouldn't buy us a parking space. Here, it's ours, free and clear." From the back seat, 7-year-old Evie pressed her nose against the glass, her breath fogging the window. "Look, Daddy, the house has eyes." Julian followed his daughter's gaze up to the 3rd-floor attic. 2 quarter-moon windows sat side by side beneath the steep gambrel roof. In the waning afternoon light, the architectural quirk gave the upper facade the distinct, menacing appearance of a face peering down at the driveway. The real estate agent, a gaunt man named Miller who smelled faintly of peppermint and stale tobacco, met them on the porch. He didn't smile as he unlocked the heavy oak front door. He didn't give the usual upbeat sales pitch. He knew why they were here, and he knew they were the only family desperate enough to ask for a viewing. "The structural integrity is flawless," Miller said, his keys jingling in the damp air. Built in 1922, standard plumbing upgrades were completed 3 years ago. And as required by New York state law, I must formally remind you of the history disclosure you signed. Claire stiffened. "The Henderson family?" "Yes," Miller said smoothly, pushing the door open to reveal a vast, shadow-drenched entryway. 14 months ago, Christopher Henderson. The police report concluded it was a sudden acute psychological break. He used a hunting rifle. The bank foreclosed immediately after the trial. That is the sole reason for the 90% reduction in market value. As they stepped across the threshold, the air changed. It wasn't just colder, it felt dense, like stepping into a room where someone had just finished shouting, leaving a vibrating, hostile echo behind. But Julian didn't feel the chill. He walked into the grand living room, running his hand over the pristine mahogany mantelpiece. He looked at the vast space, imagining his desk in the corner, away from the distractions of the city. He could finally finish his book here. They could finally breathe. "We'll take it," Julian said. Claire looked at him, startled. "Julian, we haven't even seen the upstairs." "We don't need to," he said, turning to her with a fiercely brilliant smile that didn't quite reach his eyes. "It's a gift, Claire. We can wipe the slate clean. Whatever happened here before, it has nothing to do with us." Deep within the framework of the house, a floorboard groaned under a weight that wasn't theirs. The moving truck left just as the last bruised purple light of dusk bled out over the Hudson. By 8 o'clock, the sprawling main floor of Blackwood Manor was a maze of taped cardboard boxes and looming silhouettes of furniture wrapped in protective plastic. Julian had managed to get the old oil furnace kicked on, but it did little to combat the deep, bone-deep chill that clung to the plaster walls. The radiators rattled and hissed, breathing out a dry, metallic heat that seemed to evaporate the moment it hit the center of the rooms. "It's just an old house adjusting to a drop in outside temperature," Julian muttered, wiping a streak of dust and grease from his forehead. He was sitting at the newly unpacked kitchen table, a half-eaten slice of takeout pizza hardening on a paper plate in front of him. Claire didn't answer. She was standing by the sink, staring out the window into the pitch-black backyard. The river was down there, completely invisible in the dark, but she could hear it, a low, rhythmic rushing sound that felt less like water and more like a heavy breath. "Did you notice the smell in the downstairs bathroom?" she asked quietly. Julian sighed, rubbing his temples. "Claire, the house has been sitting empty for over a year. The traps in the drains are dry. Once we run the water for a few days, the sewer gas smell will clear out." "It doesn't smell like sewer gas," she said, finally turning around. Her arms were crossed tight over her chest, her oversized sweater pulled down over her hands. "It smells like marsh mud, like something dredged up from the bottom of the river and left to rot in the drywall." "We'll look at it tomorrow," Julian said, his voice dropping an octave, carrying a subtle edge of friction that wasn't usually there. He caught himself, forcing a soft smile, and stood up to wrap his arms around her. "Hey, look at me. We're safe here. The apartment in Brooklyn was suffocating us. This is a fresh start. Okay?" Claire leaned into his chest, wanting desperately to believe him, but her eyes drifted to the baby monitor sitting on the counter. The green lights were completely flat. Upstairs, Evie was fast asleep. The first fracture. By midnight, the house had gone completely rigid with the cold. Claire woke up shivering under 3 layers of heavy blankets. The air in the master bedroom was so freezing that her breath puffed out in faint, ghostly clouds against the dark. Beside her, Julian was dead to the world, snoring softly, his face twisted into a tight, troubled frown. She reached for her phone on the nightstand to check the time. The screen remained black. The battery, which had been at 80% when she went to sleep, was completely drained. A sharp metallic clink echoed from the hallway. Claire's heart skipped. It sounded like a coin dropping onto the hardwood floor. Then another. Clink, clink. She slid out of bed, her bare feet shrinking from the icy touch of the floorboards. Stealthily, she crept to the bedroom door and cracked it open. The long upstairs hallway stretched out before her, illuminated only by the pale moonlight cutting through the circular windows at the far end. Nothing was there, just the empty, cavernous expanse of their new home. Then she heard the whispering. It wasn't a malicious sound, not yet. It was a rapid, breathless murmur, like someone rapidly counting under their breath, coming from the end of the hall where Evie's bedroom sat. Claire hurried down the corridor, her breath catching in her throat. She pushed Evie's door open. The room was freezing, so cold that the window glass was actively frosting over from the inside. Evie wasn't in her bed. She was sitting cross-legged on the floor in the absolute darkest corner of the room, her back pressed against the small wooden door that led to the attic crawlspace. Her eyes were wide open, staring intently at the blank wall opposite her. "Evie?" Claire whispered, rushing forward and scooping the little girl into her arms. Evie's skin felt like marble. "Baby, what are you doing? Why are you off the bed?" Evie didn't cry. She didn't even blink. She just pointed her small, shivering finger toward the nightstand clock. "The numbers stopped moving, Mommy. He told me to wait until they stopped." Claire looked across the room. The digital alarm clock they had plugged into the wall hours ago wasn't blinking a standard power failure signal. The red LED display was frozen, burning intensely through the dark. 3:17. The air in the room suddenly grew so heavy it felt as if the atmospheric pressure had plummeted. A heavy, sickeningly sweet odor, like lilies mixed with stagnant river water, billowed out from beneath the crack of the crawlspace door. From the master bedroom down the hall, a sudden, violent crash shattered the silence. It sounded like Julian's heavy oak dresser being violently thrown to the floor. Claire bolted out of the room, clutching Evie tightly to her chest, and ran back down the hall. But when she burst into the master bedroom, the dresser was perfectly intact. Julian was still in bed. Only he wasn't asleep anymore. He was sitting bolt upright, his eyes wide, glassy, and completely unblinking, staring directly at the bedroom door. He didn't look at Claire. He didn't look at his shivering daughter. He was listening to something deep within the walls. "Julian!" Claire cried out, her voice trembling. "Julian, wake up! Something is wrong with the power. The clocks are—" "Do you hear that, Claire?" Julian interrupted, his voice terrifyingly flat, devoid of any inflection. "Hear what?" "The rhythm," he whispered, a slow, unnatural grin stretching across his face in the dark. "The house, it breathes in fours. A week inside Blackwood Manor changed the texture of time. The initial excitement of their move had soured, replaced by a heavy, unyielding lethargy that clung to the rooms like a low-grade fever. By Thursday, the bright October sun felt distant, blocked out by a permanent slate-gray overcast that rolled off the Hudson River. Claire stood at the kitchen island, a bottle of industrial-strength bleach in one hand and a scrub brush in the other. She was exhausted. No matter how hard she scrubbed, she couldn't rid the house of that cloying, damp smell. It had migrated from the downstairs bathroom into the kitchen cabinets, embedding itself into their cereal boxes, their clothes, their hair. She pushed her hair back with the forearm of her right sleeve, and that's when she saw them in the stark overhead light. 3 distinct purplish-black bruises ringed her left wrist. They looked exactly like the imprint of a heavy, blunt hand, a thumb on one side, 4 fingers digging into the flesh on the other. Claire stared at her arm, her heart thumping against her ribs. She couldn't remember bumping into anything. She hadn't fallen. She closed her eyes, trying to piece together the gaps in her memory from the night before, but there was only a foggy blankness, punctuated by the faint phantom sound of someone counting in the dark. "Claire!" she gasped, pulling her sleeve down violently as Julian walked into the kitchen. He looked terrible. In just 7 days, he had lost noticeable weight. His jawline was sharp, covered in a dark, uneven stubble, and the skin beneath his eyes was bruised with deep, hollow shadows. He didn't look like the man who had driven them out of Brooklyn a week ago. He smelled of wood shavings, copper, and damp earth. "You startled me," Claire said, trying to keep her voice light. "How is the writing going?" "It's not," Julian said flatly. He didn't look at her. His eyes were fixed on the coffee pot. "The upstairs is too loud. Every time I sit at the desk, I hear Evie dragging things across the floor. I'm moving my workspace down to the basement, the old workshop under the stairs." "The basement?" Claire's voice spiked with worry. "Julian, it's damp down there. There aren't even any windows. You need light to write." "I need silence," he snapped. The sudden sharpness in his tone made Claire step back. Julian had never raised his voice to her in 5 years of marriage. He caught himself immediately, rubbing a trembling hand over his face. "I'm sorry. I'm not sleeping, Claire. Every time I close my eyes, I feel like I'm falling." "We can leave, Julian," she whispered, stepping closer to him, her hand reaching out but hesitating before touching his shoulder. "We can go to a hotel, just for a few days, until we get the heating and the plumbing sorted out." "We are not leaving," he said, his voice dropping into a low, rigid register that brooked no argument. "We poured every cent we have into this place. We aren't running away because an old house has bad draft and leaky pipes." He poured a mug of black coffee, turned on his heel, and walked toward the basement door off the hallway. As he opened it, a gust of freezing, stagnant air billowed up into the kitchen, carrying that sickeningly sweet smell of river mud. He disappeared into the dark, shutting the door behind him with a heavy, definitive click. The swarm. By mid-afternoon, the house grew completely silent, save for the rhythmic, distant thud-thud-thud of Julian hammering something down in the basement. Claire went upstairs to check on Evie. She found her daughter sitting on the rug in her bedroom, arranging her stuffed animals in a straight, unbroken line facing the closet door. "Hi, sweetie," Claire said, leaning against the doorframe. "Do you want to come downstairs and help me unpack some books?" "I can't, Mommy," Evie said without turning around. "Billy says we have to stay inside today. He says the sky is going to get dirty." Claire felt a cold prickle of dread at the base of her neck. "Who is Billy, Evie?" "The boy who lives in the walls," Evie said matter-of-factly, her little hands patting a stuffed bear into place. "He says he used to sleep in this room, but then his daddy got loud with a loud gun, and now he has to sleep in the dark part." Claire walked over and knelt beside her daughter, grabbing her gently by the shoulders. "Evie, listen to me. There is no boy in the walls. It's just an old house making funny noises. You're imagining things." Before Evie could answer, a strange sound began to echo through the room. It wasn't a thump or a floorboard groan. It was a low, vibrating drone, a collective, frantic buzzing that seemed to emanate from the window glass. Claire stood up and walked over to the window. Her breath caught in her throat. The entire lower half of the window pane was black. Hundreds, no, thousands of massive bloated river flies were crawling over the glass. They weren't outside. They were inside, trapped between the glass and the interior screen, their oily bodies writhing over one another in a chaotic, desperate mass. As Claire stared in horror, a sharp crack echoed through the room. A tiny spiderweb fracture appeared in the center of the glass pane. The flies weren't just landing, they were throwing themselves against the window, their hard shells striking the glass with the rhythmic, terrifying sound of 100 tiny fingers tapping to get out. "Julian!" Claire screamed, grabbing Evie by the hand and pulling her backward out of the room. "Julian, come upstairs, now!" She slammed Evie's bedroom door shut, but as she turned around into the hallway, she realized the buzzing wasn't just coming from one room. It was everywhere. From the light fixtures in the ceiling, from the floorboards beneath her feet, a dark, vibrating hum was rising, shaking the very framework of Blackwood Manor. The oppressive atmosphere of Amityville's dark legacy had fully taken root in Blackwood Manor. The swarm of river flies had vanished as mysteriously as it arrived, leaving behind a heavy, silent dread that fractured the family into separate, isolated realities. The archives of the damned desperate for answers and suffocating under the weight of the house, Claire grabbed the car keys and drove down the winding, fog-shrouded roads toward the local town archives. The small municipal building was cold, smelling of old paper and damp stone. The town historian, a frail woman named Eleanor, didn't look surprised when Claire asked to see the microfiche records for the Henderson case from 14 months ago. "People around here don't like to talk about that house, Mrs. Vance," Eleanor said, her voice a papery whisper as she threaded the film into a flickering projector. "They think if you speak its name, the river remembers." As the bright white light hit the screen, Claire's stomach plummeted. There, in stark black and white, were the police photographs of the Henderson home. But it wasn't just the crime scene that made her blood run cold. It was the historical timeline Eleanor unrolled on the desk beside her. 1974. Christopher Henderson systematically takes the lives of his family in their beds, claiming voices from the basement commanded him to do it at exactly 3:17 a.m., 1952. A wealthy industrialist goes mad inside the same walls, barricading his children in the attic crawlspace before turning a hunting rifle on himself. 1926. The original builder of the manor disappears, leaving behind a journal that spoke of an unholy rhythm vibrating up from the bedrock beneath the Hudson River. "It's a cycle," Claire whispered, her hand trembling as she touched the glowing screen. "Every few decades, the house chooses someone new." "Not the house," Eleanor corrected softly, her eyes filled with a grim, pitying sorrow. "The land it sits on. It was a burial place for the sick and the outcasts before the foundations were ever poured. The blood isn't just on the walls, dear. It's in the water." The hidden well. While Claire was uncovering the horrifying truth in town, Julian was descending into his own private hell. Deep within the basement workshop, beneath the stairs where the shadows pooled thickest, he worked by the flickering amber light of a single halogen bulb. He was no longer writing. The typewriter sat abandoned on a dusty workbench, its keys jammed with a thick black residue that looked like dried blood. Julian was staring at the floorboards. For hours, a rhythmic metallic tapping had been echoing directly beneath his feet. Tap, tap, tap. Driven by an obsessive, feverish need to find the source, he grabbed a heavy iron crowbar and began violently ripping up the ancient, rot-weakened floorboards. The wood splintered and groaned, breathing out a stench so foul it made him gag, a horrific mixture of stagnant river mud and old, decayed bone. Beneath the wood lay a hidden, brick-lined circular opening. It was a dry well, sealed away for nearly a century. Julian leaned over the edge, shining his flashlight into the abyss. The beam of light cut through the damp gloom, illuminating a small, rusted iron box sitting at the very bottom of the pit. Crawlspace mud coated his hands as he climbed down the rotting wooden ladder into the well. His breath hitched as he pried the rusted lock off the box. Inside lay a leather-bound journal from 1926 and a heavy, tarnished brass crucifix, broken cleanly in half. As his fingers brushed the broken metal, the halogen light bulb overhead violently shattered, plunging the basement into absolute pitch-black darkness. Julian didn't scream. In the dark, the whispers began again, louder than ever, filling his head with a deafening rhythmic chant. The air grew freezing, and as he stood at the bottom of the well, he felt a cold, phantom hand rest heavily on his shoulder. When he opened his mouth to breathe, he didn't taste air. He tasted the bitter metallic tang of river water. The storm did not arrive with a gradual warning. It dropped like a guillotine. By 9 o'clock on the night of November 1st, an unseasonal, monstrous blizzard had completely engulfed the Hudson Valley. Heavy, wet snow slammed horizontally against the western facade of Blackwood Manor, frosting the windows over with a thick, jagged skin of ice. The wind howled through the eaves, making the massive gambrel roof groan like a ship breaking apart at sea. Inside, the temperature plummeted. Claire stood in the center of the kitchen, wrapping a heavy wool blanket tighter around 7-year-old Evie's shivering shoulders. The kitchen was illuminated only by the fragile yellow beam of a single plastic flashlight resting on the counter. 10 minutes ago, a massive explosion had echoed from the main road, a transformer blowing out under the weight of the ice. The house was dead. No lights, no heat, no phone lines. "Mommy, I'm scared," Evie whispered, her breath puffing out in a distinct white cloud. "The house is breathing too fast." "I know, baby, I know," Claire murmured, her eyes locked onto the basement door at the end of the hall. "We're going to get into the car. We're going to a hotel in town. We just have to get your father." Claire hadn't seen Julian since she returned from the town archives. He had locked himself in the basement workshop, ignoring her frantic pounding on the door, ignoring her pleas about what she had discovered in the old police records. The only sign that he was still alive was the sound, a continuous, rhythmic thud. Thud. Thud, vibrating up through the floorboards. It sounded like someone methodically swinging a heavy weight against the stone foundation. Leaving Evie by the kitchen island, Claire took a deep breath, her heart hammering against her ribs, and walked down the dark hallway. The air grew progressively more foul the closer she got to the basement stairs. The smell of rotting river mud was so thick it coated the back of her throat, slick and oily. She reached out and turned the brass doorknob. To her surprise, it clicked open. "Julian?" she called out into the black abyss of the stairs. The tapping stopped. Total suffocating silence rushed up from the dark to meet her. Claire clicked on her flashlight, casting the beam down the wooden steps. Dust motes danced in the light, but the air was freezing, far colder than the storm outside. She descended slowly, the wood groaning beneath her boots, until her feet hit the damp concrete floor of the basement. The beam of her flashlight swept across the room and stopped. Julian's workshop was unrecognizable. The walls were covered in chaotic, frantic charcoal scratchings, thousands of numbers, all repeating the same sequence over and over. 317, 317, 317. In the center of the room, the floorboards had been completely ripped away, revealing the gaping black maw of the hidden, brick-lined well. Julian was standing at the edge of the pit. He was completely naked from the waist up, his skin pale, gaunt, and smeared with thick black river mud. His fingernails were bloody and torn down to the quick from clawing at the earth. In his right hand, he held a heavy, rusted iron crowbar, its tip caked with dried plaster. He didn't turn around when she entered. He was staring down into the dark well. "Julian?" Claire's voice broke, a sob catching in her throat. "Julian, please. Look at me. We have to leave. The power is out. There's a blizzard. We need to go." Slowly, mechanically, Julian turned his head. Claire choked back a scream. His eyes were completely bloodshot, the vessel shattered, leaving his gaze looking like a mask of pure red. A terrifying, wide smile split his face, his teeth stained dark. "We can't leave, Claire," he whispered. His voice didn't sound like his own. It was deep, gravelly, vibrating with a strange, double-toned echo. "The rhythm is almost complete. The house needs 4. It always needs 4. "Julian, you're sick," she pleaded, taking a cautious step backward toward the stairs. "Come upstairs. Think about Evie." At the mention of his daughter's name, something in Julian's face snapped. The vacant smile vanished, replaced by an expression of pure, unadulterated fury. He raised the heavy iron crowbar high above his head, the muscles in his back tightening. "The blood belongs to the water," he screamed. The escape. Julian lunged forward with terrifying, unnatural speed. Claire scrambled backward, throwing herself out of the way as the iron crowbar came crashing down, shattering the wooden workbench behind her into a spray of splinters. She scrambled up the basement stairs on her hands and knees, her chest heaving, the terrifying sound of Julian's heavy, mud-slick bare feet slapping frantically against the wood right behind her. "Evie, run!" Claire screamed as she burst through the basement door into the kitchen. She slammed the heavy oak door shut just as Julian slammed against the other side. The wood groaned, the frame splintering as he threw his weight against it. Claire frantically turned the deadbolt lock, but a second violent impact from the other side cracked the panel completely. A bloody, mud-caked hand punched directly through the center of the wooden door, fingers clawing wildly for the lock. Claire didn't hesitate. She grabbed Evie by the arm, lifting the little girl off her feet as they bolted toward the grand entryway. But the house was fighting back. The air pressure in the hallway plummeted so violently that Claire's ears popped. The heavy front door, their only clear exit to the driveway, violently slammed shut of its own accord, the deadbolt sliding into place with a definitive metallic clack. Behind them, the basement door gave way with a deafening crash. Julian stepped into the hallway, his red eyes burning through the dark, the crowbar dragging along the hardwood floor with a horrific, screeching screech. 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 "Mommy!" Evie shrieked, burying her face in Claire's neck. Trapped, Claire looked to the left. The large, floor-to-ceiling glass doors of the dining room led out to the back porch overlooking the river. "Hold your breath, baby!" Claire yelled. She grabbed a heavy, iron-bound dining chair and hurled it with all her remaining strength into the glass. The pane shattered with a deafening explosion, a cloud of jagged shards mixing with the freezing snow that instantly billowed into the room. Claire scooped Evie back into her arms and leaped through the broken frame, her boots crunching violently over the glass shards. The sub-zero wind hit them like a physical blow, instantly freezing the tears on Claire's cheeks. Behind them, Julian appeared at the broken doorway. He didn't step out into the snow. He stood on the threshold, the howling blizzard whipping his dark hair across his face. He didn't look angry anymore. He just stared at them with that wide, vacant grin, slowly raising his hand to wave a rhythmic, terrifying goodbye. Claire didn't look back again. She sprinted through the knee-deep snow, blind, exhausted, and bleeding from a dozen small cuts, carrying her daughter away from the silhouette of Blackwood Manor. Behind them, high up in the third-floor attic, the 2 quarter-moon windows gleamed in the dark, watching them go, waiting for the cycle to begin again.